Before we look at our first classical opening, I want to show you an example which demonstrates what can happen if black tries to copy all of white's first moves. There are many openings where black does copy several of the first opening moves because they follow principles, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it can only go so far because white has that extra move, and with that extra move he can do some serious damage, so black has to depart at some point and not copy every one of white's first moves. So let's look at what can happen. So white develops the pawn to e5. Let's look at all the copycat moves. I'm not going to explain all the reasons behind the moves. We looked at many of these same moves earlier. The knight develops, knight, both knights out, both pawns out. So far everything's the same. Bishop develops to c4, bishop to c5. Black says, I'll make the same moves as you. Castles, castles. So far so good, he thinks. And it is so far so good. Pawn moves, d3, pawn moves to d6. Bishop pins the knight. The black bishop pins the knight. The knight attacks the other knight, putting pressure on the pinned knight, and black puts pressure on white's pinned knight. The queen moves out of the pin. The black queen moves out of the pin. Identical positions. Copycat chess. And now the bishop takes the knight, and the bishop takes the knight. And now the white knight throws in a check. That's the problem. Check is a forcing move. So black can't do the same check right now. So the king has to run, and that's a critical tempo. The king runs, and white throws in another check. So you see how at this point black can no longer copy white's moves. The king captures. Pause the video. See if you can find the finishing moves here. So pause the video. Okay. The queen checks. The king has only one running square. Here, he can't run here because of the knight. Can't run to any of these three squares because of the queen and the knight. The king runs, and voila, checkmate. Because the king can't run here. And so the king has no escape squares. So this is what can happen if you try to be a copycat and copy if black tries to be a copycat and tries to copy all of white's opening moves. Okay, now proceed to the first video on classical openings. The first one we're going to look at is the Giocopiano.